You're listening to the Road to Wisdom podcast, weaving stories told by wonderful minds about all things motherhood, health, intimacy, politics, nature, and everything in between.
Join us on an adventure discovering unique experiences that we can learn from to enhance the ways in which we live.
We are your hosts, Chloe
and Keshia.
Oh, Freya, we have arrived. Finally, I feel like there's been so much back and forth with our beautiful technology that we're just so grateful to have, because we wouldn't be able to have this conversation without it. But also, can you please work? Today on the show, we've got Freya Kellet, who I've been following for years. Like, I've been following you before you got married or even met your husband, and it's Matthew, isn't it? Yes.
Yeah.
And way back when you just had that potent voice about like feminism and women and birthing and rights and modern feminism and political things that were going on, and I was like, oh my God, this person is speaking to me and using the words that I will never have to explain how I feel about certain topics. And then you started talking about G&M, and I was like, oh, this is so interesting. And so along with you and Melissa, who we recently spoke to, really sparked interest in G&M. And I think for anyone who knows, has kind of had their toes dipped in the wellness sphere long enough, things don't really make sense from the standpoint of, I guess, things like deficiencies or, you know, virus transmission or germs or even some of the bigger things. They just don't really make a whole lot of sense. So when G&M entered the chat, it kind of started making sense. So you've been talking about G&M stories and sharing them on your podcast, and some of them are incredible. And I actually remember listening to Matthew's episode where he talked about having the eczema behind his ear for like his entire life. And you guys went on this mission to find out what was going on. And it was so simple. And I was like, surely not. Like, surely it is not that simple. And so eventually, like, this eczema thing that was behind his ear for his entire life just poof, magically disappeared after you guys realized what it was. So, so cool. And if anyone wants to hear what I'm talking about, they should go back and listen. But anyway, welcome, Freya. It's going to be so cool to talk to you today.
Well, thank you for that introduction. I was actually laughing with Matthew earlier today because I was like, they're totally, like, I really hope they don't ask me what I do because I have no idea how to explain it. So I'm glad that you gave that introduction so I don't have to do it. And yeah, but that's a big part of my story, right? Is like, I have been in the alternative health world. I think I became a vegetarian when I was like 14 or something. So it was a long time. And, had chronic issues. Specifically, I had chronic pain for like over a decade, which I'm really grateful for at this point because it just led me further and further. And I just had to keep asking questions. And yeah, like I did everything. I ate organic food. I became a farmer. I only wear organic clothes and I sleep on organic bedding and I turn my internet off at night and I like wear barefoot shoes and like self-massage every day, like doing everything and still having symptoms and like getting to the point of like, I can't like optimize for health anymore than I currently am. And yet these things aren't shifting and like, what the fuck is wrong? And I feel like now, and I kind of like lived that, not silently, but it's a little bit like there almost is like some shame. I talk about this with a lot of people now of like, what's wrong with me? Like I'm doing everything. And all these people on the internet with the big Instagram pages, they seem to be like glowing and healthy and have no issues. And here I am like doing my best and still having issues. And now like I know why,
Let's go into that.
Of the 5 laws.
Let's go into how because obviously this was like massive catalyst for walking, like kind of really discovering this because you're hungry for trying to understand what the heck was going on with your body. So you obviously found G&M, and how did that, because I know you've said it so many times, like you just cannot believe that you're just pain-free now after spending so much of your existence in chronic pain. So I'm so interested to hear what happened.
Yeah, well, so I mean, I found GNM through Melissa, like so many of us. And that was right at the beginning of COVID. And it made total sense to me. I think resonated on a deep level. And I had absolutely no idea how the fuck to like apply it in my life, like how to actually use it to get better. And it's a really like dense world to try and step in at the beginning, because there's a lot to understand and there's a lot that you can easily misunderstand. And even when you understand it, it's a whole other thing to then be able to apply it and understand the whole kind of process of resolution. So I had known about it for 2 years and could explain it to people. Like I did get it, but I didn't understand how to resolve issues. And also, there's a way where it hadn't really even occurred to me, because I specifically had chronic pain, like kind of back, shoulder pain, and just so deep in like physical symptom must be the result of a physical cause, that it was like, it took me 2 years of like knowing GNM to be like, I wonder if my chronic pain is actually the result of a special biological program that has become chronic in what we call the hang healing in German medicine. And it's quite a long story, but kind of a bunch of serendipitous things all occurred at the same time. And I just had this huge aha moment and could remember precisely the moment that caused years of chronic pain. It was when I was like 13 years old, this boy that I was in love with. And so we start kind of weaving in the language of the 5 biological laws. So the first law is called the iron rule of cancer, which is like very jargony and kind of confusing, but really I just translate that very simply to shock first, symptom second. So there is this shock and it means something so particular. And this, there's a lot to like wrap your head around in GNM. And so this shock, this thing that happens, it's surprising. So it catches you on the wrong foot, catches you off guard. It's also very specific. So it's not generalized. And I think a lot of people kind of get lost here of like, oh, well, I know like the symptom came on when my boyfriend broke up with me or my kids left home or whatever. But it's like literally it's a split second. It's such a specific moment in time. And then the third criteria, to me, I understand it as like the emotion went unsuppressed. You felt emotionally isolated. The real like that kind of subconscious impulse, that immediate feeling went unfelt, unexpressed. And so this kind of lays the perfect storm for this biological adaptation. So for me, what happened when I was 13 is that I was in love with this boy and there was a party and I totally, went to the party like, oh, we're going to hook up at the party. It's going to be amazing, And then I get there and find out that he's like making out with some other girl. So, right, this is a very specific moment. Like there was a moment where I'm walking up to the party and everything's going to be amazing. And then there's like a flash second where someone tells me, oh no, he's in the bushes over there. Right. So particular moment in time. And then the emotion went totally unexpressed because I didn't tell anybody because I was like so embarrassed. I didn't want to be caught. I didn't want to be that girl, and it caught me totally off guard. And so for me, this was a self-devaluation conflict. So there's multiple conflicts that can affect the muscle. Well, there's 2 specific. So there's a self-devaluation conflict. So, I'm not good enough. I'm stupid. I'm smart. I'm a bad wife. I'm a bad partner. I'm not beautiful enough, whatever. And it can also be a motor conflict, which is I feel stuck. I feel frozen. And they affect 2 different parts of the muscle. But for me, this was a self-devaluation conflict. Specifically, the most acute pain was behind my right shoulder blade. And so when it comes to these conflicts that affect the muscles, the whole body is mapped out of kind of like what is the particular emotional nuance of each, muscle group, bone. And this behind the shoulder blade is stab in the back. okay, it's betrayal. So it's some kind of self-devaluation in relation to betrayal. So I felt betrayed. I felt stabbed in the back. Now, there's many different ways I could have interpreted that experience. I could have been angry at him. I could have felt separated from him. But the way I perceived it, because I'm really sort of oriented to self-devaluation, that's often my immediate impulse when something challenging happens, was I'm not good enough. Like this happened because I'm, not beautiful enough. I'm not like as good as this other woman, whatever. So it triggered this self-devaluation adaptation in the muscles behind my shoulder blade, which I experienced for like a decade, is this like excruciating ripping pain. And yeah, when I had all these things come back to me, and that's just like, this is like one piece of was quite a big story around, because I had many, it wasn't just one conflict. There was like multiple things that were kind of all coalescing into kind of like body-wide chronic pain. But that was like the biggest initial first aha moment. And when I connected all those pieces, because that conflict's no longer relevant for me, it's no longer alive. I was like, I was 13. I don't care, right? That he hooked up with this other girl when I was 13. It just, when I connected those dots consciously, the whole thing dropped. And so that was my first experience of really feeling in my body, oh, that's what a conflict shock feels like. Oh, that's what a resolution feels like. And that was just over a year ago. And since then, I don't know, I've probably clocked like 30 or 40 different, special biological programs from very small things. Like every single cough, every pimple, any symptom I have, a stomach ache, like I have to find the thing to like, behavioral, psychological adaptations. And so anyways, I kind of got like this little bit obsessive, and I've gone in so deep since that moment, because I was just like, holy shit.
I'm
like,
so interested to know, like when you say you've resolved it, and like you've just explained, okay, so I've gone back there and I've like, oh, had an aha moment. Is the aha moment and the putting the dots together and being like, I think it's that. Is that all it takes for a resolution?
It's so particular to each person. So to me, like the biggest determining factors are, well, one, you have to touch the right thing. and that doesn't always happen. And often people are not specific enough, as I kind of alluded to. They get like, oh, I know that it was in relation to this person or around this time. But, we're talking, I'm always walking people like, you were fine up until what moment? What exactly did he say? It was the look. It was the moment you got this text message. Like, what really caught you within the whole context of the breakup, let's say. But more than anything, so there's kind of like two ways it goes. One is like you find the conflict and you have the awareness moment, and it's just like sparkly miracle, like everything drops away in that moment. Or it's this more kind of like chunking away at it. And to me, what I have seen as the difference is if the conflict is no longer relevant to you, like if that cannot happen again, you don't care about it, you can laugh about it, it's over, like it's just dead in the water, then everything just lets go. That book closes, it's put back on the shelf. Like you don't need that special biological program anymore. But, a lot of our conflicts are still alive for us. Like the thing that happened 3 years ago, we still feel those feelings. Like it's still there, and it takes more attention to work and unravel it and become a different person. Like between the time I was 13 and 25, I had become a different person. And so I could no longer have that conflict anymore. But there are conflicts that I have that, like, I know the conflict shock, I know the initial resolution, and I still, what we call step on the track in German New Medicine. An example, like I have a wrist on this, so it's the same special biological program of a self-evaluation, but it's localized to my wrist. And if it almost feels like like a bone's out of place. Like it's very painful, crunchy, weird pain. And it's very silly. Maybe some people can kind of empathize with it, but it's a self-evaluation around um, perceiving other people's judgment of me being on my phone. So if I'm ever like scrolling on my phone in front of other people and I go like, oh my God, they're totally think that I'm just like a brainwashed young person who's addicted to their phone, you know, I start like I step on the track and I can trigger this wrist pain. So like I know the original conflict. I know the first time it resolved, which initiated the pain, and I know very consciously what the track is because I see it. I know I step on it all the time. Well, all the time, you know, maybe once a week right now. And but I'm still somebody who can feel ashamed about being seen scrolling on their phone in public. So that conflict is still alive for me. I can still re-trigger it. Does that make sense? Like,
Yeah. And it's really interesting that
those
you've
two?
brought this up. Is this your right wrist?
It's my right wrist. Yeah.
Well, I have this as well. Like I have this weird thing and I'm like, oh my God, did I just inherit carpal tunnel yesterday? And it's so intense today. I don't know what's going on. And then like the next day will just be completely gone. I'm like back to lifting heavy or back to picking up my kids or back to like, whatever it is. And it's so weird. But since I've known about GNM, I'm always thinking about like what has just happened or what have I experienced, because that's the only thing that makes sense. Like for this intense, sharp pain in my wrist, like right in the, like where that little bone is. And then for it to just be like gone the next day, or sometimes it can be within hours.
That like, to me, nothing else is explained. And these were just questions that I was like blind to previously. But now it's like, well, why does pain come when it comes and goes when it goes? And why is it your right wrist and not your left? And why does somebody get a rash on their face or a rash on their belly? And why does some person get, you know, breast cancer in the left breast or the right breast? Or why does one person get liver cancer, another gets ovarian cancer? Like, why do we all express different symptoms with different intensities at different points in time? Like these other kind of paradigms, like, oh, it's the toxins or it's the you know, malnourishment or whatever. It doesn't explain each individual's unique expression of disease and like the immense specificity of it. And GNM with just like this beautiful crystalline map, like it really explains in such a coherent way why we all have different symptoms and why they come and go and why sometimes they're more intense than others. And it's really like, I can't express just how remarkable it is to have this relationship now with my symptoms where like I know every single, I'll give another just like, this is a really such a simple example. 2 nights ago, I'm at my mother-in-law's spending the night, and in the middle of the night the fire alarm beeps, and I think the battery ran out or something, and so it made like a noise, but it happened to be in the middle of the night. And Matthew gets up to go and check on it. And I immediately just like the flash thought is like, oh, can I smell anything? Like, should I be, I didn't really know what it was. I'm like, is it the carbon monoxide alarm? Like, can I smell smoke? Should we open the window more? I just have this flash kind of thought about, is the air, like, can I smell something? And then, you know, him and his mom figure out it's just the fire alarm. That's a low battery. And we go back to bed. And when Matthew comes back into the bed, we turn off the lights, go back to sleep. All of a sudden, I'm like, I can barely breathe out of my nose. Like, I'm just so stuffed up. And Matthew's like, what the heck? Like, why are you sounding like that? And it took me like a minute to be like, I know what it was. Because so the nose sinuses, we're looking at sort of 2 different tonalities of conflict. So one is a stink conflict. This is like, you know, a situation that just like sucks. You just like can't believe it's happening. It's shitty. It's annoying. So that's with stink conflict. And then it can also be a scent conflict. So I smell danger, right? Like you're trying to smell the danger in the air, or you can't smell your mother, for example. You know, smell is such a important biological communication. So in this case, when the alarm went off, I became conflict active with, is there danger? Like, do I need to sniff out the danger in the air, the smell? Like, is there smoke? Is there carbon monoxide or something like this? So I became a conflict active. Matthew came back to bed. Nothing was wrong. Resolution. And then I had this symptom of the really stuffy nose until I could see the whole picture, and then it all just went away in like 2 minutes because I had conscious awareness of it. And so that's a really simple example, and it seems silly, and it seems like, well, why does it really matter? But it's like profound to know what every single symptom you have is. Like that is it's mind-blowing, like the amount of just safety and calmness that you feel after having that kind of like adeptness with the 5 biological laws is.
It also makes incredible sense when you really zoom out and just look at us as complex human beings who we are not that much different to any other animal that have, constant threats in nature that they need to protect themselves from. And animals do a fantastic job of doing that. But because we're obviously incredibly dissociated and we're human beings living this really weird modern world, we're often closed off to that. And so if we were open to the idea that maybe these things are just innate, like little alarm systems, or the inner knowing of the threats, or what's to be real and what's not so big of a threat, kind of also makes a lot of sense.
It would be great actually, because I am a self-proclaimed G&M rookie, and it would be really cool if we could go into the 5 biological laws, which you were just mentioning.
So I'm guessing Melissa told the story about Dr. Homer when you guys, is that true? Okay, so I won't repeat that. So
if you haven't listened,
all of this,
just to our listeners, if you haven't heard that one yet, just go back.
Melissa, start again.
She goes into all of this, and Freya, you can go on from the end of that story.
So Dr. Homer, obviously the brilliant man who gifted us this whole framework. And one thing I want to say up front, which I think is confusing for people and takes time to really for this to sink, German New Medicine and the 5 biological laws is not another modality, right? It's very different from a modality. This is he called them biological laws for a reason. So the first biological law, I think I already touched on a little bit, this iron rule of cancer. And it's called the iron rule of cancer. He originally, when he, first kind of publicly shared this law, my understanding is he believed it only applied to cancer. And then he later, because he originally was studying cancer, and then later discovered no, even, a simple cold, basic rash, acne, diarrhea, anything. No, it's all, these special biological programs. So I already kind of explained that, the first biological law. So something happens, and then there is an intelligent adaptation by the body, this initiation of a special biological program. And which special biological program is initiated is dependent on the emotional, subconscious experience of the person who had the shock. And so these shocks, again, these are moments, they're very specific, very acute moments in time. There's this element of surprise, of being caught off guard, and this feeling of emotional isolation in the moment. The emotion went suppressed. And so you could be in a room full of people, right? You could even be there with your best friend, and you could still have that sensation of this is too, no one's going to understand this, or I can't share this. I can't I can't feel this. I can't even just acknowledge this to myself because it's in opposition to my identity or how I wish I had responded in the moment. And so we have this shock, and this triggers an adaptation at 3 levels synchronously. So the tissue level adaptation, the brain level adaptation of the Homer focus in the brain. So this is why Dr. Homer and someone who's trained in studying brain scans from a German New Medicine perspective can look at a brain scan and tell you your entire health history, every symptom you've ever had. They can tell you, what symptoms you have currently, which ones you would have in the future if you were to resolve your currently, conflict active symptoms. So you have the brain level adaptation, and then the psyche level adaptation of rumination, fixation, worry, obsession on the content of the conflict. And so this, this is probably the most fundamental law, that there is the shock, and really grasping like, what does that feel like, and people, I think, often kind of, it takes a little while to get this. And this is why I'm so like passionate about sharing the stories, because I think when you hear the stories, you can really like put yourself in another person's shoes and be like, oh yeah, like I kind of know that feeling. It's often not these like big capital T traumas that we have in our life. It's often smaller, kind of trifling, petty experiences that actually can create chronic tissue adaptations. So does that make sense for the first biological laws, or anything you want to clarify? It's sometimes challenging, when you're so deep in the world, to like make it simple.
It's I find that really, really interesting, actually, on like the big traumas versus little traumas, because it's something that we went into with Melissa as well. Because just thinking about, I mean, we took it back to our children and like symptoms that they're experiencing, and how they can have something so chronic and huge from something as small as
saying no one time.
Yeah, saying no to a cookie one time. And then, but then you see kids that go through some really hectic trauma, like big traumas. And it's almost because it is such a big thing, your body, like, I mean, obviously that can come with a range of different, disassociations or whatever, but it's almost like you see this pattern of, because it's such a big thing, they kind of know, okay, that's not going to happen again.
Or because it's so big, it's acceptable to have a reaction to it that's fair, or like something really big happened. Oh, poor you. Like, let's talk about it. Let's go through this together. Where if it's just like you said no and then end of story, they have to be like, I can't get past that. Like, I don't know if that's
okay.
That's kind of how, like, this is just my personal conclusion of like really pondering this. Like, why does it tend to just be like dumb everyday shit that causes like, big chronic symptoms, and not the huge traumas in our life? And I do think it's because these kind of often like these small moments where we have like this immediate response, right? You have a shock, like the immediate emotion response, kind of psychological experience, is often our most unflattering, unevolved, unspiritual, like unpertinent, not very personal development-y. It doesn't reflect like our most like ideal selves oftentimes. These are kind of like our tender things, are like things that we're still working through. They're crunchy. And so I think that because, for adults, what I notice a lot in myself, and now, working with lots of other people, it's when we have big things happen, there's a sense of like, it's okay to feel the way that I feel about it. And I talk about it, and I do end up kind of processing it. And I do have this understanding of like, this happens to lots of other people. Now, when I'm, scrolling on Instagram and I see something and I have this, matches all the criteria of a conflict shock, and my feeling is like of jealousy. Now, do I want to tell anybody that? No. I don't want anyone to know that. I don't want anyone to know that like I'm, so lowly that I would have like a jealous feeling in response to another woman, like that's not the kind, I don't want to like tell my best friends about that. I mean, now that I know G&M, I talk about everything because I understand kind of the importance of that. But I hope you're kind of getting what I'm saying here is, it's like, because these petty things we feel unjustified in feeling, I think. And so oftentimes that's why it goes unexpressed, because we just feel like this goes in opposition to my identity. Like, for example, like, self-devalue, I kind of think about it as like we all have kind of our like conflict constitution, just like it's like the way we're sort of more oriented to. So my husband, he's very separation conflict oriented. Like a rash, like that's going to be eczema is like his symptom. Whereas for me, it's self-devaluation. And it's always interesting how oftentimes our identity keep us from seeing our conflicts, right? Because I am a very confident person in many, many ways, right? And I'm like known on the internet as being like the woman who doesn't give a fuck and will like say anything. And my tag used to be like the dangerous woman. And then here I am with all these like chronic self-evaluation symptoms, right? And so like your symptoms always kind of really humble you is what I see often. And because being insecure is like so in opposition to who I think I am, who I want to be, how I want to be seen by others, like it's not okay for me to feel those moments of insecurity and self-evaluation. And so they get suppressed and they don't get shared. And I experience them in isolation. And so I think is that kind of making sense? Like it's often these small things just because we don't want to share about them. We don't want other people to know about like the weird, things that are going on in our head.
How can we like resolve them though without getting a microphone and be like, friends, sit down. I'm going to dump all of my petty insecurities on you right now.
Dude,
even though I do that to her.
Yeah.
But like,
but this is so funny because like, okay, so I used to be someone who hated compliments. Like I could never receive a compliment. And I reckon like I can't actually link this to any G&M stuff, but like,
let's try and get your first link and you can really believe it now.
But I used to be really, really bad at receiving, like if someone gave me a compliment, I would like deflect it straight away or like put it back on them and just like try and judge them up more or whatever. And I learned this just recently about myself that I'm like really bad at receiving in general, like compliments, help, whatever it is. And I when I realized that, I'm like, okay, I need to stop doing that. And I've got an example from like your message the other night. Chloe had met someone that I'd met ages ago and she's like, oh my God. And the way you came up in the conversation, she was just like raving about your parenting. And I was like, you know what? I have a big head right now because I'm feeling really good about myself. Like just change it in my head and start like, okay. And just like voice how I'm feeling. I'm like, great. You are boosting my ego right now. I'm going to sleep really well. Thank you so much. And it's like, once you do voice those things, I mean, I've always, I don't know why, but I have always been able to voice when like if someone is really good looking and I'm like, I'm feeling super insecure being around that person right now. Or like I will always just bit of an open book like that. But
maybe that's why you're a book of beautiful health with no symptoms, Keshia. No.
Could you imagine? That would be nice. Yeah, but I could see how closing yourself off to, when you feel something like that and not being able to just voice it. And once you do, people, most of the time, no one really gives a shit or they'll just laugh at you. Yeah. But but I could see how like when you hold that in, like that could create like tension within your body and how that would then,
translate to a physical like adaptation or symptom.
Yeah. So no, it's a good thing to think about.
What's the second biological law?
Biological law.
Okay, so the second biological law is the law of two phases. So basically this is like the yin yang of biology. So when we have this shocking moment, the fire alarm goes off, the boy you love is making out with another girl, whatever it is, there's this problem. You become conflict active. Okay, so normally we're in this like day-night rhythm. And so in the day, we're what we call like sympathetic in German medicine. I just think of it as like coffee, like you're awake, you have less appetite. You're just like, it's daytime. And then at nighttime, you're what we call vagotonic. I think of it as like chamomile tea, like you're chilling, you're resting, you're sleeping. So this would be like kind of our homeostasis. But when we become conflict active, from that moment of shock, we become like, we kind of jump up into this hyper sympathetic state. And the intensity of that is determined by the intensity of the conflict, right, that we just experienced. Now, some things are really small and some things are really big, and that's going to dictate like the level of tissue adaptation, but we become conflict active. So at the level of the psyche, when we're conflict active, we are ruminating, we are obsessing, we're fixating, we are just like churning over this issue, because we need to solve it, right? Our psyche is like, you have to just keep focusing on this. Like, this is part of the biological adaptation, because our body, like, the point is not to be in these special biological program for months or for years, and that's kind of how we end up in this kind of state of health we have today. The point is to get out of it as quickly as possible. And so part of the adaptation is this at the level of the psyche, this worry. This is when you wake up at 3 a.m. That serves a biological purpose, because gives you more time to think and to find a solution. So that's happening in the psyche. At the level of the brain, you're going to see, if there was a brain scan, you would see what's called a Hammer focus, this brain lesion in a very specific part of the brain. So the whole brain has been mapped out by Dr. Hammer, and he would be able to see by the location of the Hammer focus, the brain lesion, which brain relay is it in? And that would dictate what's happening at the tissue level. So at the tissue level, it depends which special biological program, and it could be, multiple, depending on what happened, has been triggered. There's going to be different types of tissue adaptation. So primarily there's either tissue growth or tissue loss in the conflict active phase. So let's say in the case of an indigestible morsel program in the stomach, let's say, so something, you just couldn't stomach this morsel. Again, this is like language that takes a time to wrap your head around, because you have to start learning how to think biologically. So a morsel, previously, before we're like kind of our modern humans, this is food, air, water, like sperm. It's like the basic things that come in and go out of your body. That would be a morsel. Now today we have, it's much more like symbolic. So money is a very, very common morsel of people that they want, and that they have issues around, and they can trigger symptoms. It can be a relationship that you want, an idea that you just can't take, an accusation, so many things. But let's say the stomach program is triggered, there's going to be tissue proliferation in the conflict active phase. So there's going to be like super powered function of the stomach so that it can break down this morsel that it can't digest. Whereas with let's say the self-evaluation program that we've already been discussing, of the bone or the muscle or the lymph, in the conflict active phase, there is actually tissue loss. It's actually breaking down the bone or the muscle tissue. And so, this is a bigger map, and eventually it just kind of all becomes memorized, but in the beginning, you have to sort of, pay attention with each symptom, what's happening in the conflict active phase. So conflict active, and then there's a moment of resolution, hopefully. Not always. Sometimes, you can live in the conflict active phase with a specific biological program for your whole life and never find a resolution. But ideally, you find a resolution, your husband makes sure that the fire alarm is fine, there's nothing in the air that's wrong, and you go to bed. And so that stone has dropped from your soul, that issue is over. The looping rumination has stopped, and you feel this sense of peace, this sense of relief, this sense of just calm, like everything is good. And so you have resolution. So we were in kind of a hyper sympathetic state, and now we have to, in order to come back to homeostasis, like this, the yin yang, right, we have to kind of balance out. So now we go into this hyper vagotonic state, and this is where most, not all, but like most symptoms are occurring, especially like all kind of cold and flu symptoms. These are all happening from the moment of resolution onwards, because there was this tissue growth or tissue loss in the conflict active phase. And we now have to return to normal, and there has to be a process to bring us back to normal. And so this is where, there's tissue decomposition if there was tissue growth in the conflict active phase, or there's tissue regeneration if there was tissue loss. So in the case of the muscle program, sorry, do you have a question?
No, I was just going to say that's probably one of my favorite parts of G&M, just thinking that like the symptoms that you're experiencing are actually the
healing process.
Yeah. It's such a, it's a beautiful way to look at it, because especially because symptoms can be quite scary sometimes. So it's nice to think of it.
Well, and to be really clear, like, you know, it's a beautiful way to look at it. And but it's also like, it's just the way it is, right? Like it's not, I think some people kind of, and when they first find G&M, it's like, oh, it's so cute. Like, wouldn't that be lovely? It sounds so sweet and so lovely. And like, but we actually live, like, we do live in this astonishingly like intelligently, like benevolent world. Like our bodies are always working for us, always. Every symptom has a purpose and a meaning, and there is, you know, such meaning to why did you get a cold exactly when you did, and why did you get the specific symptoms you did, and maybe your daughter got a slight variation of the symptoms and she got it 2 days later or something like that. There's
we should
like
quickly use what's happening if you feel like it with the last, like,
I don't know, I feel like it could be a little complicated.
No, I feel like it's very relatable though, because this happens so often in families where there's kids.
Yeah, but it hasn't. Okay, so this hasn't actually happened before.
It's happened to me before.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's happened to me.
Okay, so usually when my kids, I'm a very like grounded thinker. So, you know, I'm like, okay, we've got a virus. There's a foreign body. Like if we go through like a gastro bug, which generally runs through the schools, we'll get it. Everyone kind of gets it at a different stage, like one after the other. So we've got a good long period of being up and awake. But this has happened, and before we're on air, me and Chloe were talking about this. One of my kids has been throwing up just once every night or every second night for the last 2 weeks. And Chloe's like, oh, wait, when did that start? And I'm like, I don't actually, I think it was just after we had fires that came quite close to the house. We were actually on a bit of a hyper alert for about 24 hours there. And yeah, it was after the fires, that I think is when we kind of started seeing symptoms occurring. So 2 of my kids have been experiencing them. One has been, just this random vomiting, and because there is a gastro bug going around through the schools, I'm like, okay, so there's something there, but it's not presenting like a gastro bug. It's just this really random, like he's eating during the day, he's fine. And then at night, one puke and then goes back to bed. And now just recently he started complaining of stomach pain, and now he's got the runs as well. So, and now we're actually seeing him lose weight and that kind of thing. So I'm like, oh my God, what is this?
But also Poet had it too, didn't she?
Well,
and you had it sporadically.
Well, but all different symptoms. So then,
but the thing that was striking me is like it's been on Sundays.
So that was just Poet, So just Poet has been doing like the last 3 Sundays. She'll wake up and puke, and that's it. And then for me, it was last Tuesday night, but I had like a migraine and fevers and chills. No one else has had that, and I was up all night.
This is the part.
And then I was puking.
This is the part.
And
where
then I had like days of like, I thought it was COVID.
It makes no sense. The only thing that makes sense is the possibility of like G&M, like what is happening for each individual. Because if it's gastro, technically, if you believe in gastro,
presenting,
it you all should have been like head in the bowl together, or one after the other. Because that's allegedly what happens. But that's not what happens. But we call it gastro and we don't give it any more thought.
Well, that's the thing. It's not gastro, is it?
No.
Because it's just like we've never
What's happening, Freya?
Freya, can you enlighten me?
Yeah. Okay, well, I mean, there's a lot, like so much to break apart there. So one is, you know, from this perspective of the 5 biological laws, like we have a very different understanding of like contagion, right? And getting something and something being passed around. So basically we don't believe in that. In short.
And I think
So,
this is like the perfect scenario of that not being the case, because I've got 4 kids.
Yeah.
Like there's 6 people living under this roof and only 3 of us have been affected. And we share towels, everyone baths together, we're sleeping in the same beds, we're sharing foods and cups and whatever. Like it's, so a contagion part of it is
that's enough
kind of
anecdotal
void,
experience for me to really blow it up.
But
I was just saying that that's enough anecdotal evidence for me to be like, the contagion, it's gone, it's gone.
well, and we have
Theory's
to
gone.
really we just start asking very different questions when you know this information. So, even when we are talking about where the whole family has the same symptoms, or, a whole class at school gets, quote unquote sick, instead of it just immediately, oh, there's a bug going around, it's, well, what shared psychological experience happened? Like families experience things together, classes experience things together. And there's always typically, 1, 2 people who don't get the thing, and they're the one who's just chill and they don't really care. So they didn't get wrapped into whatever drama happened. And so there's just like so much to get into in these cases of like shared symptoms. We can talk about COVID, but it's a great, such a great example of that. But okay, in this case that you're talking about with your son, correct? Yeah. Okay. So, when it comes to vomiting, there's 2 different special biological programs. So there's the small curvature of the stomach, which is territorial anger. And so that is just like nausea, vomiting. And then if there is diarrhea and vomiting happening together, my understanding is it's likely an indigestible morsel that's in resolution, and in this case includes vomiting. And so we're always looking for like 2 beats in Germany medicine. So you're looking for, what was your son's conflict? So what was the specific moment in time that it caught him off guard and, emotionally isolated? And then what was the resolution? So the first night that he vomited, what happened, right? What happened that day that was a resolution for him? Because that's a resolution symptom. So something had to happen that brought peace for him, that he just let it go. He dropped it. It was a conversation. It was, it can be something so subtle.
What is it?
God. Dad came home.
Oh,
Sorry.
suddenly Keshia believes in GNM.
Oh my God, he just hit something. No, because my husband works away a lot, and this is and this is my child who like that. It's a big deal for him every time Dad goes away, and he's always counting down the nights when Dad gets home. And when the fires happened, he was really freaking out. He was my one kid that was really nervous and stressing about it. We're all trying to like calm him down a little bit. And the night that he started vomiting was actually the night that Dad got home. So that
makes perfect sense. And I think that can be a bit confusing because people always, well, nothing was happening when I just got my cold. And yes, because you're only getting the cold, or you're only getting the flu, or you're only starting vomiting because a resolution has happened. And so by that point, you've forgotten the thing that you were like obsessively worrying about, 2 days prior. You're in the state of peace and everything's fine and and that's when the symptom comes. So we're looking for those 2 beats. So if that was the resolution, if the kind of idea here is the conflict shock was these fires that happened. And so then so now he's vomiting. Now, if it's continuing and it's kind of becoming this chronic thing, and now it sounds so it's every night he's just like one vomit.
every second. Like it hasn't been happening every night. He's had it maybe 2 nights in a row. It was like every second night for a bit, or he had like the first night, and then he had like 3 or 4 nights nothing, and then it's been like a continuous thing. It's hard because I've had so many kids doing things.
Well, and it's challenging, like, because you really have to start paying attention, and it oftentimes is helpful to keep things written down and kind of track that way. But what I will say before getting a little bit further, like, I mean, I don't have children yet, but I do work with mothers And so I've, have talked about this and helped a lot of women, I'm so excited to have kids for for so many reasons, but for this one too, because, when you learn German new medicine, it's such a profound insight into your children, because every single symptom is, revealing a specific nuanced psychological experience. And you can really start to learn, what moments impacted your child and in what way, right? Like some children are very, they're always having chronic ear infections, whereas others are always having digestive issues and others are always having sinus issues. And why is that? It's because they have different psyches. So they're perceiving the world, experiencing the world in different ways than your other child or the other kid at school or whatever. And so it's just this beautiful way where if you're really adept with it, it's like a mind reading tool, you start to really, oh my God, that's how my kid saw that thing. That makes so much sense. So it's just a fascinating way to relate to your child, and also for them to experience their bodies, right? Because even if you're in the regular alternative health scene, it's okay, well, now it's time to get out the tinctures and it's time to do the homeopathy, and something's wrong here and we need to fix it. From this lens, it's wow, what happened? Your body is so wise, your body is so smart. What just happened before you vomited, why? It's just a very different conversation, and it's seeding this real deep trust in themselves and their body. And it's also an opportunity for a child to really learn about themselves. So anyway, so with kind of a recurring symptom like this, so this is what would be called a hanging healing. So this is one of the ways a symptom can become chronic. So something happens when that initial conflict shock happens. The subconscious basically takes a screenshot of what occurs in that moment. So it's recording the people, it's recording what's in the air, it's the food that was in the mouth or recently digested. It's also recording the emotional, the felt experience in the body, the thought pattern, everything, whatever is important to that specific person is kind of getting recorded in the snapshot, that specific moment in time. And that's being stored. And so now when that person, so let's say your son, he has his resolution, his father comes home, he just feels protected. He feels that peace. He feels that safety of his dad coming home. That really means something to him. And so he can finally let go of this thing that he's been turning on. Resolution, he vomits. But then he can step on a track. That's what we call it in German new medicine. Essentially, a track is like an allergy, except for the pool of potential allergens includes everything. It's not just these physical things like pollen or milk. It can also be these emotional experiences. It can be your mom, it can be your dad, it can be the thought of your dad leaving again. It can be just, any number of things. So for me, stepping on the track with my phone evaluation is I'm at the cafe and I'm standing in line, and then all of a sudden I have this flash thought of that woman's totally judging me for answering my messages on my phone right now. I started to step on the track. Later that, half an hour later when I'm at home working again and I completely forget about that moment, I've stepped off the track, my wrist is going to start hurting again. And so with your son, what's happening is that he initially vomited, but now that initial conflict, it's still alive for him. And it's kind of he's ripping the scab off. He's still concerned about that. He still believes potentially it could happen again. Is it specifically that he's worrying about your dad, his father leaving, or the fire, or we'd have to really delve into it. What is it for him? But there's something that is being chronically re-triggered, which is why he's, one day he'll vomit, the next he won't, then he'll vomit again, and then he won't for 3 days. It's not random. It seems random, but it's not random. There is very precise meaning as to why he vomits when he does and why he doesn't on the other days,
So if you were trying to help your child resolve a conflict, so there was no hanging healing,
Yeah.
would it just be like as simple as having a quiet moment with them and having a chat and trying to get them to be like, yes, this is the thing, or like, or just being like, hey, I know it must be tough for you when dad goes, or it must have been really scary for you when you thought there was a fire, or like it must be like busy, feel busier or feel more chaotic or hectic or louder, or when dad's not here and it's just me and I'm trying to, you know, do the best I can to keep you all alive. Like, is that, would that be how we would facilitate helping our kids in those times?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is, like with everything in GNM, there's no cookie cutter answer because it's unique to each child's psyche. And like, you know, as a mother, you're the best healer because you know your children the best. So you know their kind of the uniqueness of their personality and their psyche. So there's not like, you know, a blanket answer. First of all, you know, you'd really want to you know, correctly identify what was the conflict, what was the resolution. And you know, I think most often you can, mothers can like, they remember, you know, all these little things and can know, but sometimes your kid goes to school, like you're like, well, what happened? Right. And that's where it's like, I don't think, it also just depends of like, where is the family culture in terms of health, right? It's all of a sudden you're just like dropping GNM and the kid's like, what the fuck? Like, I don't know what any of this means. I don't know what you're talking to me about. Or is it like the kid has grown up immersed in this and like they know themselves, oh mom, I must, like, what indigestible morsel did I just resolve? You know, because they're so in that world and they don't perceive that you catch anything, right? There are children that I you know, like that's the world they live. Like the idea of like catching a thing doesn't occur to them, right? Because they grew up in GNM. But yeah, so we'd want to know, first of all, you know, was it a territorial anger with your son, or was it an indigestible morsel? So territorial anger, it's some kind of, you know, dispute, argument, like some kind of beef in the territory, you know, like, or he wants to, like, he's kind of taking on that kind of aggressive feeling. So was there something where there was like a tension between the two of you?
He's always aggressive. That would be really hard to nail down.
Right? Also, he's
an angry
kid.
A
boy, right? So he has male perception. So that's healthy for him to be seeing the world that way. Or was it this indigestible morsel of like something he just couldn't stomach about it? It was like too much to take. He can't digest the situation. And then, you know, his father came home. That was the resolution. So figuring out the specifics in his story. And then there's two avenues broadly of resolution. One is practical, right? So, I mean, I'm still like, I don't know for sure. So there were fires. Your house was on fire?
Oh, no,
or like
no.
There were fires in the area?
Yeah, just bushfires that got really close. Okay. And we were like to the point, I mean, they weren't, it was kind of like a hit and miss situation because if they kind of jumped this river, we would have had to evacuate. But the wind was blowing it this way, so we were covered in smoke. Like you couldn't really see out the windows and stuff.
Okay, so you know, if that's the conflict, and even that, it's like, well, what is it? The fires that he's upset about? Is it that he wouldn't be able to take his stuff? Is it that his dad isn't there? Is it what you said to him? Like even within this whole, we've narrowed in of maybe it's this fire, but what for him actually was it within that? What specifically was it that caught him off guard, that he felt emotionally isolated in? So you have to kind of figure out that nuance. And then is there a practical resolution? That is the easiest, right? Like, okay, he wants to, you know that he can bring this thing if you guys evacuate. He wants to be able to know that he could phone his dad, or, you know, he just needs to know there's a plan of like, all our stuff's in this bag and we're going to go here. And he just really wants to be talked through of like what the plan would be if it were to happen. You know, then the other kind of avenue is this like perceptual shift, which I think is more challenging with children, but I don't think that's ever impossible. And that is more of the like talking it out and helping him expressed what went unexpressed in that moment. Like, why did he feel emotionally isolated? Like, why was there something that he felt like he couldn't say to you or get out in that moment? And then, figuring out specifically what the track is, and just helping him like come up with a solution for himself, right? And experience his own resourcefulness, his own strength, his own ability to like feel safe, feel strong, feel capable of like digesting the experience. Does that make sense? Like there's just like so many, we have to like do kind of a bigger conversation about it to get in depth, but broadly, and there's other things to do when like a child is like pre-verbal and all of this, but and I'll say one other note that I feel like I always try and kind of touch on with parents, like at one level, the point here is to address like the specific symptom, right? And to understand it and resolve it and move on from it. But at the other level, like at the meta level, like it's to see this new reality for them, right? It's to remind your child, like, you're so smart, your body is so smart, like everything's okay, you're safe. There's nothing wrong here. This is not a mistake. Something very intelligent and wise is going on. And with our curiosity, we're going to figure it out and we're going to work together. And like, isn't this so interesting? And like, it's really like laying this whole other relationship to the body where symptoms are not a problem. They're not something that like need to be fixed. They're not shameful. He's not broken. And that like, that is the biggest gift, right? Like, yes, you want to solve the individual thing, but ultimately the thing that will change the course of his life, 30, 40, 50 years down the road won't be that like he figured out how to stop vomiting in that one moment, but it will be like the whole kind of like,
trust in your body and
orientation to like, wow, like every symptom has a meaning and I can learn so much about myself and like evolve in this like very profound way so that let's say 60 years from now, he has a big shock and he, something quite major happens. It's no big deal for him. Like he's so rooted in GNM. He's so like dialed into the 5 biological laws. Like he understands, he finds his conflict, he finds the resolution. Like it's no big deal, So it's kind of like two things happening at once. And it's okay if there's a symptom happening and like almost like that piece and that just like, it's all good is more important than like getting hyper fixated on like we have to fix this, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah,
those
absolutely. I'd love to switch up the conversation a little bit because we're getting a little low on time. And it's something that we spoke about just before we started recording, Freya, which was pregnancy, because we did put a little shout out, and we won't get to everyone's questions, unfortunately, but quite a few people were asking about pregnancy and yes, and you let us know that it's actually quite a different state of being. And it can be quite complicated. So I think we did have questions about hyperemesis and morning sickness in general, and then also gestational diabetes. So, I mean, if you want to give us like your brief understanding of the state of pregnancy, and then
we'll have another 2-hour conversation another day about it.
Yeah. Okay. So in GNM, the whole map is based around like 4 different tissue types that originated from like 4 different moments of evolution. So the ectoderm is the most like recently developed tissue, the cerebral cortex, the most like recently evolved part of the brain. And at this 4th stage of evolution, prior to that, we were kind of like more individual organisms. And then we like at this 4th stage, social units developed, and these social relationships and being interdependent, like that became a core part of survival. Like we don't survive on our own, right? We need other people. And so there's also like this kind of differentiation and division of tasks at this point in time. And so here also previously, all these other tissue types, these other stages of evolution, the conflicts associated with them, they are not dependent on one's biological sex at all, right? Like you're going to experience a self-evaluation conflict and so can a man. There's like no difference. Now, there might be some self-evaluations that women are just more prone to, like culturally, than men. But otherwise, you know, self-evaluation is a self-evaluation. But when we get to the cerebral cortex, what we call one's hormonal status starts to really matter. So we are all either biologically female or biologically male, and that is unchangeable. Right? That is our biological sex. I've spent many time on the internet articulating that. So we all know this is biological reality. You're either male or you're female.
Thank you for clarifying that.
But over our life, something interesting is that we can be, and this language is like triggering to people. Okay. And I get it. And it was like kind of confronting for me for a while in the beginning, but it does really make sense the deeper that you get into this body of work. So even if we are biologically female, we can either be hormonally male or hormonally female. So several things can impact this, whether we are hormonally male or hormonally female. And the reason this is important is because when we get to the cerebral cortex, there's the left side of the brain are all of the brain relays for the female perceived conflicts. So female perceived conflicts, this female perception, it's much more like kind of inner focused, like the internal territory, the sexual territory, the reproductive territory. You know, it's like, who am I? You know, where do I belong? And it's the kind of immediate impulse is to flee, right? It's the flight, because we need to take our children and go protect them. Whereas and so on this side, the conflicts that we're looking at, we've got scare fright. So this is the larynx, laryngitis, this like scary moment. We have the sexual conflicts, which would affect the cervix. We have the rectum surface mucosa, which is an identity conflict. So this is hemorrhoids, an identity or decision conflict. And then the bladder, which is a territorial marking conflict. And the right side of the brain is where we have the brain relays for the male perceived territorial conflicts. So male perception is like, you know, it's the external boundaries. It's more aggression, right? It's more the fight kind of impulse. So instead of, there's kind of like an equivalent to all these conflicts. So instead of, we have got the larynx, the scare fight conflict would be the female, and then the male perceived sort of equivalent of that would be the bronchi, which is a territorial, a fear in the territory. Okay. And then we've got the territorial anger that we were already talking about, that inner curvature of the stomach. We've got the coronary program of the territorial loss, and then the kind of male marking conflict. And so this all matters for pregnancy because there are different moments in our life, and you know, this is a very big conversation. So I'm giving you like major Coles notes right now. But interestingly, when we are pregnant, women actually become hormonally male. And this means that we switch into male perception. Now, this really makes sense. The way that I think about this is like, we have this kind of archetype of like the mother bear, right? And the mother bear is like the most, you know, stereotypical mother, this idealized mother who's going to protect her children. But a mother bear, you know, she is hormonally male, and she needs to be, because, and people may or may not know this, but like the male bear, who might be the father of her cubs, will potentially eat her cubs. You know, the male bear wants to reproduce again and doesn't want competition with a male cub. And so she has to become territorial. She needs to, you know, really protect her newborn and kind of have this more like ability to fight and like awareness of the external boundaries of her territory and this. So that's how it, you know, it really makes sense to me that when women are pregnant and when they are like around the clock breastfeeding, so before they start ovulating again, they're territorially they are hormonally male. So they have a male perceived complex. So the reason that this matters is because when women are trying to figure out like, okay, I have morning sickness, like what's going on? You have to understand both laterality, which we haven't touched on yet, which is handedness. Once handedness really impacts kind of which order of conflicts you're going to experience. And then with this tissue type, also your hormonal status impacts it as well. But maybe just kind of more broadly, what I'll say is like anytime that there are different symptoms experienced, right? Some women experience morning sickness and some women don't, right? Some have pelvic girdle pain and some don't. And so, and there are days when you vomit and there are days when you don't vomit. And there are days when you vomit 30 times and other days where you're just a bit nauseous. And like, what is explaining this difference in symptoms? Well, from a GNM perspective, anytime that there is like, well, some people get it and some people don't, we are looking at the psychological experience of the person and what is the shared psychological experience among those who have the symptom and those who don't. And so, yeah, all of these things that we understand to be like pregnancy symptoms and, oh, it's just kind of the way it is. It's like, well, is it the way it is, or is it a biological adaptation that some women are experiencing and some aren't? And yeah, so that's kind of probably maybe we like leave it there and have another conversation about it. But you can for sure, I've worked with women successfully, around hyperemesis or like, pelvic pain or tailbone pain or whatever it is.
It's complex.
That's
definitely
a whole other way of
I guess gestational diabetes would also flow into that as well. Like, yeah. Oh, amazing. Well,
thank you so much.
Yeah. Where can people find you if they want to hunt you down for more GNM wisdom?
Yeah, it's a lot. It's so challenging to like distill into these small conversations because it's just such a vast topic. But yeah, so I have my Instagram page, which is just my name, Freya Kellet, and then the podcast. So it's called German New Medicine Stories Podcast. And after struggling for many years to like learn this information, to me, the clearest way to really understand how to use this in your life, like in a functional way, is through stories. And so that's the point of this podcast. The German Medicine Stories Podcast is to have people on. I teach a little bit, but mostly it's these to learn through stories, to hear, how. Because you can go on to, learninggnm.com and you can memorize the entire scientific chart, but you have to be able to translate that for your unique psyche, for the unique psyche of your son, and figure out like what's his morsel conflict, what is his territorial, anger, what's your son's territory. That's a really interesting thing to consider as well. And so that's where these stories come in. And yes, people can find me basically podcast, Instagram, website.
Amazing. Thank you so much. We can't wait to chat again.
Thank you so much, Freya. This has been enlightening. Thanks for tuning in to the Road to Wisdom podcast. To join the journey, you can follow us on Instagram at theroadtowisdom.podcast and at www.theroadtowisdompodcast.com. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. We look forward to seeing you next week with more juicy content.